When Vera Hayes accepts a position as assistant to the reclusive billionaire Adrian Thorne, she thinks she's finally caught her break. But the whispers start immediately. His previous assistants all vanished without a trace. Determined to uncover the truth, Vera begins her own investigation, only to discover a horrifying pattern that links each disappearance to a specific date on the calendar. As that same date approaches, Vera realizes she's not just uncovering Adrian's dark secret, she's racing against time to escape becoming its next victim. But Adrian is always watching, and he's been waiting for someone exactly like her. This is 15-minute binge watch. One story. One obsession. 15 minutes. Let's begin. The elevator doors opened to the 68th floor with a whisper, and Vera Hayes stepped into a world of cold marble and colder silence. The reception area of Thorne Industries gleamed with the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. Everything was black, white, and chrome, sharp angles and sharper edges. She clutched her portfolio tighter, reminding herself that she needed this job. 3 months of unemployment had drained her savings to nothing, and this position paid 3 times what any other assistant role offered. There had to be a catch. There always was. Adrian Thorne's office occupied the entire top floor. When Vera entered, he didn't look up from the wall of monitors displaying stock tickers and financial data. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 35, with dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from the same marble as his floors. When he finally turned those ice-blue eyes on her, Vera felt something cold slide down her spine. "Miss Hayes," he said, his voice smooth as silk over steel. "You're punctual. I appreciate that." "Thank you, Mr. Thorne." He circled her slowly, and she forced herself to stand still, chin up. "Tell me, did you research my previous assistants before accepting this interview?" The question caught her off guard. "I noticed the turnover rate was high." "High?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's diplomatic. 7 assistants in 2 years, Miss Hayes. Most people would call that a red flag." "Most people aren't desperate enough to overlook red flags," she replied before she could stop herself. For the first time, something like genuine amusement flickered across his face. "Honest. Good. I can work with honest." He returned to his desk, gesturing for her to sit. "You start Monday. Mrs. Chen will handle your paperwork." That had been 4 weeks ago. Now, sitting at her pristine desk outside Adrian's office at 11:30 at night, Vera wondered if honesty had been her first mistake. Adrian kept unusual hours, often working until dawn, and expected her to match his schedule. But the money was real, deposited into her account every Friday like clockwork, and she was starting to pay down her debts. What bothered her were the looks from the other employees. The pitying glances from the accounting department. The way security guards watched her with something that looked disturbingly like sympathy. And then there was Marcus, the IT technician who'd stopped by her desk that afternoon. "You seem nice," he'd said quietly, pretending to check her computer. "So I'm just going to say this once. Start looking for another job. Now." Before she could respond, he'd left, and Adrian's door had opened. Her boss stood there, watching Marcus's retreating back with an expression she couldn't read. "Is there a problem, Miss Hayes?" "No, sir. Just a routine check." He'd studied her for a long moment, then retreated to his office without another word. But Vera couldn't shake the warning. That night, after Adrian finally dismissed her at midnight, she stayed behind in the building's library. If something was wrong, there would be records. The employee directory went back 5 years. She found them easily. Rebecca Chen, assistant for 3 months. Disappeared. Emily Santos, 4 months. Disappeared. Sophia Loran, 2 months. Gone. The pattern continued, 7 women, all vanished, all last seen at Thorne Industries. But the police reports she found in cached news articles all said the same thing: no evidence of foul play, no signs of struggle, cases gone cold. What made Vera's blood freeze was the dates. Each woman had disappeared exactly 6 weeks after starting work with Adrian Thorne. She pulled up her own start date with shaking hands and counted forward. 6 weeks. That gave her 2 more days. She had to be wrong. This was crazy. But as she dug deeper, she found something else: financial records, buried in old expense reports. Adrian had made substantial payments to a property upstate, a former psychiatric facility he'd purchased 3 years ago. The same facility that had once treated his mother before she died there under mysterious circumstances. Vera's hands trembled as she printed everything, stuffing the papers into her bag. She needed to leave, now, tonight. She'd send everything to the police from somewhere safe, somewhere far from. Working late, Miss Hayes. She spun around. Adrian stood in the doorway, perfectly still, watching her with those unsettling blue eyes. He was still in his suit, not a hair out of place despite the hour. How long had he been standing there? "I was just finishing some research for tomorrow's meeting," she lied, her voice almost steady. "Were you?" He moved into the room with predatory grace. "And what did you learn?" "Run," her instinct screamed. But her legs wouldn't move. "That you're very thorough with your investments." "I am." He was close now, too close. "I'm also very thorough with my background checks, Vera." "May I call you Vera?" He didn't wait for an answer. "You're smart. Observant. Exactly what I needed. But you're also curious, and curiosity is dangerous." "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" He pulled a photograph from his jacket and laid it on the table. It showed a young woman, blonde and smiling. Rebecca. Lovely girl, terrible liar. She found my mother's medical records and threatened to go to the press. Another photo. Emily. She accessed my personal files. Thought she could blackmail me. More photos, each woman's face frozen in time. They all discovered things they shouldn't have. And they all made the same mistake: they thought they could outmaneuver me. Vera's bag was on the floor beside her, the papers inside suddenly feeling like a death sentence. "What did you do to them?" "Do?" Adrian's laugh was cold. "I gave them what they wanted. Money. New identities. One-way tickets to countries without extradition treaties. You see, Vera, those women weren't victims. They were accomplices." The room seemed to tilt. "What?" "My mother didn't die in that facility. She was murdered by the staff, and the hospital covered it up. For 3 years, I've been gathering evidence, using my assistants to help me infiltrate their records, their systems. Each woman I hired had a specific skill set: hacking, forgery, investigative journalism. They helped me build my case, and in return, I made them disappear before the people responsible could realize what I was doing." Vera's mind raced. "But the police think I'm a serial killer." He smiled grimly. "Better they suspect me than investigate the real criminals. The board members of that hospital have connections everywhere. If they knew what I was planning, they'd bury the evidence and everyone involved. Then why tell me? Why not just?" "Because you're different." He pulled up a chair and sat, suddenly looking tired. "The others, I recruited them knowing what they could do. But you, Vera, you stumbled into this with nothing but instinct and determination. You found connections in 4 weeks that took Emily 3 months to uncover. You're the piece I've been missing. I'm not a criminal. Neither am I. I'm a son seeking justice for his mother." He leaned forward, and for the first time, she saw real emotion in his eyes: grief, rage, and something desperate. "In 2 days, the statute of limitations expires on one of the key crimes. If I don't move now, they walk free forever. I need someone I can trust, someone who understands what's at stake. Help me finish this, Vera. Help me make them pay." She should say no. Should run. Should call the police. But she thought of her own mother, dead from medical negligence when Vera was 16, the hospital administrators who'd shrugged and offered a pittance of a settlement. She thought of all the women who'd helped Adrian and were now living new lives, free and wealthy. She thought of justice, real justice, not the kind that could be bought. What would I have to do? Adrian's smile was sharp as a blade. What you do best. Be my assistant. The next 48 hours blurred together in a frenzy of preparation. Adrian introduced her to his network, a journalist in London, a lawyer in Berlin, a data analyst in Tokyo. All of them former assistants, all of them very much alive and working to expose the corruption that had killed his mother and dozens of other patients. The facility had been running illegal drug trials, using vulnerable patients as test subjects. When Adrian's mother had realized what was happening and threatened to go public, they'd overdosed her and called it suicide. The board had buried the investigation, paid off officials, and continued their experiments for 2 more years before finally shutting down. But Adrian had evidence. Recordings, documents, testimonies from former staff members who'd been threatened into silence. He'd spent 3 years building an unassailable case, and now, with Vera's help, they were ready to strike. Why make it look like your assistants disappeared? Vera asked as they worked side by side in his office, dawn breaking over the city. Protection, Adrian replied, not looking up from his laptop. The hospital board has made people disappear before, permanently. If they thought my assistants quit or moved on, they'd ignore them. But if the women vanished mysteriously, it drew attention away from their real work and made me look like a suspect instead of a threat. The police investigation into me kept the board complacent. That's incredibly risky. Everything about this has been risky. He finally met her eyes. Including trusting you. You don't trust me. No, he admitted. But I'm hoping I can learn to. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, working with a man she'd suspected of being a serial killer, to take down actual murderers. The world had turned upside down. At midnight on the 6th week of Vera's employment, they struck. Every major news outlet simultaneously received encrypted files containing 3 years of evidence. The journalist in London published a bombshell exposé. The lawyer in Berlin filed criminal charges. And Vera, sitting in Adrian's office, watched as the board members of the defunct psychiatric facility were arrested one by one on live television. Adrian stood at the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. It's done, he said quietly. Finally. What happens now? Vera asked. Now. He turned, and she was startled to see tears on his face. Now I can stop being a monster in everyone's eyes and start being a man again. You were never a monster. Wasn't I? I manipulated 7 women, put them in danger, made the world think I was a killer. All for revenge. For justice, Vera corrected. There's a difference. He studied her for a long moment, then crossed the room. When he took her hands in his, they were shaking. I need you to know something. That property upstate, the facility, I bought it to preserve the evidence. But I also turned it into a rehabilitation center for people who'd been victims of medical abuse. Every dollar I made from Thorn Industries went into that center. I couldn't save my mother, but I saved others. Vera felt tears prick her own eyes. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought it was just another manipulation? He was right. She would have been suspicious. Trust wasn't easy, not when you'd spent 6 weeks thinking you were working for a killer. So what happens to me now? She asked. Do I disappear too? Adrian's laugh was soft, almost shy. That depends. How do you feel about staying on as my assistant? The real position this time, not the covert operative version. The pay's the same, but the hours are better, and I promise no more dark conspiracies. Just regular billionaire drama. I can't promise there won't be some drama. His smile was genuine now, transforming his face. But I can promise honesty. And maybe, if you're willing, something more than a professional relationship. Eventually. When you don't feel obligated because I'm your boss. Vera's heart stuttered. Are you asking me out, Mr. Thorne? I'm asking if I have a chance, Miss Hayes. Someday. When you've had time to process everything and decide if you can forgive me for the deception. She thought about the past 6 weeks. The fear, yes, but also the thrill of the investigation, the satisfaction of seeing justice served. She thought about the men behind the cold facade, the son who'd spent 3 years orchestrating an elaborate revenge plot while simultaneously saving lives. She thought about how it felt to work beside him, the way his rare smiles made her pulse quicken, the electric charge when their hands accidentally touched. "I think," she said slowly, "that you might have more than a chance. But you're right, I need time. And you need to grovel." He laughed, a real laugh that lit up his entire face. "I can do groveling. I'm very thorough, remember." "I remember." 6 months later, Vera stood in the same office, but everything had changed. The wall of monitors still tracked the markets, but now they also showed live feeds from the rehabilitation center upstate, where former patients were beginning new lives. The 7 former assistants had returned to testify at the trials, and 3 of the hospital board members had been convicted of murder and fraud. The others would follow. Adrian emerged from a meeting, loosening his tie with a tired smile. "Ready to go." "Where are we going?" Vera asked, though she was already gathering her things. "Dinner. Real dinner, at a real restaurant, where we can have a real conversation that doesn't involve criminal conspiracies or corporate espionage." Sounds suspiciously like a date. It is a date. He helped her with her coat, his hands lingering on her shoulders. "I've groveled for 6 months, Vera. I've been patient and respectful and painfully professional. But I'm tired of pretending I don't want more. So yes, this is a date. A real one. If you'll have me." She turned in his arms, looking up at the men who'd once terrified her and now made her heart race for entirely different reasons. "You know what's funny? I came to this job thinking I'd found my lucky break. Turns out I found something much more valuable." "What's that?" "The truth. Justice. And maybe, if I'm very lucky, love." His kiss was soft, tentative, nothing like the calculating billionaire who'd interviewed her 6 months ago. This was Adrian, just Adrian, vulnerable and hopeful and finally free from the weight of his secrets. When they pulled apart, Vera smiled. "By the way, I met with Rebecca last week. The journalist. She's writing a book about the whole thing." Adrian groaned. "Of course she is. And she wants to interview both of us. Multiple times. In great detail. You're enjoying this?" "Maybe a little." She linked her arm through his as they headed for the elevator. "Consider it part of your groveling. You wanted thorough. I'm very thorough too." His laugh echoed through the empty office, chasing away the last shadows of the past. The elevator doors opened, and together they stepped inside, leaving behind the darkness and moving toward something neither of them had expected to find: redemption, justice, and a love forged in the most unlikely circumstances. As the doors closed, Vera caught one last glimpse of the office where she'd spent 6 weeks believing she was working for a monster, only to discover she'd been working with a man willing to sacrifice everything for those he loved. She'd been right to be afraid, wrong about the reasons. But in the end, that fear had led her exactly where she needed to be. Sometimes the truth was darker than any fiction. And sometimes, in that darkness, you found exactly what you'd been searching for all along. Some loves save you. Others own you. If you crave dangerous billionaires and twisted romance, subscribe to 15-Minute Binge Watch. The next story starts soon. Don't miss it.